Good morning. Probably should get going. There seems to be a bit light on the ground this morning. Don't know if there's a problem with the email link or something. Just a couple of bits of news this morning, and then we'll be talking to Tom Williams from Downing Renewables and Infrastructure, who I think has got an interesting story to tell at the moment. So the obvious one first is Hipgnosis, but I also wanted to pick up on Syncona, a couple of fairly big funds that are out of favour. Hipgnosis first. I mean, we've all seen this chart. It's a pretty dire picture. Discount now is close to 50%. Market cap still about 990 million quid. Sort of quick recap, because obviously we've been talking about this quite a lot, and I've just reused some of the slides from earlier shows, but they're selling about a fifth of the portfolio to a related party. Their proposal is that that's at a 17.5% discount to NAV. Whereas I've got in the small print there, it turns out that there are quite a lot of transaction fees and stuff that we didn't pick up on because they're properly buried in the announcement. And so that pushes the price down quite a bit in terms of what Song is going to get. And then there was obviously the main problem is that because it's been done at a big discount, there's a huge transfer of value from the shareholders of Song to the related parties, including the manager. And then we also noted, on 29th September, this is that the feedback was pretty negative, and therefore the chair decided he was going to step down. They were going to introduce some more continuation votes. They shortened the manager notice period. They introduced a sort of discount triggered management termination thing, which is not something we've seen before. And then they also sort of reiterated the idea that there may be a bid at a higher price for the portfolio. Although the other thing is that the manager had the right to match that, so that may have deterred people from bidding, because why would you go through all of that effort and then just get pipped again by the manager? So that was, all the run up to this week. This week, we had this announcement from the independent valuer that they'd over accrued on money that was due to them for royalties payable from 2018 to 2022. And they'd over accrued by an enormous amount of money. So more than twice as much as they should have done. And because of that, which is obviously going to knock on the earnings, the board had decided to withdraw the dividend that they'd already announced. And they said they were doing this to ensure compliance with the fixed charge cover ratio covenant, which is on their debt. That's all a bit worrying, obviously, and then not surprisingly, the share price went down on the back of that. And it's all a bit puzzling too. So these numbers have been around for a long time. So the sort of decision on making the royalty rate 15.1% was sort of officially taken in July 2022, but it was the proposal that the companies had ever all made in 2018. So this number has been around for a very long time. It's obviously very good news, and it was touted as such by us and by the company and everything else, because it's a big improvement on the 10.5% people were getting earlier. But obviously this money wasn't trying to flow straight through. So it was accrued in the accounts, and then they had to persuade all of the sort of people like Apple and Spotify and stuff to actually cough up the money. The whole thing wasn't actually finalised, announced as finalised until August 2023. And I cannot understand how the accrual could have been that wrong, really, given that we've known what all the numbers are for a very long time. It relates to accounting periods that are well in the past. It just all smells a bit, really. And it does raise a lot of questions in my mind about the whole validity and quality of the valuation generally. The covenant issue, we're talking about, I spent quite a long time after the accounts came out in July, talking about the loan to value covenants. But fixed charge coverage ratio, I don't think we thought that was a problem at all. And that's because we assume, I think along with most other people, that they'd be comparing a full year's worth of income with a full year's worth of dividend, but they weren't by the looks of things. They seem to have been, because again, we pointed out July, they only include 3 months, so 3/4 worth of dividend in the accounts because they changed the timing. But they seem to have used that in the calculation. And so that 1.3 figure here is massively inflated, and it probably was closer to the actual fixed coverage ratio even then. So really all not good. So in the back of all of that, the latest concession to shareholders is that we're going to initiate strategic review, including the possibility of changing the manager. They say that the shareholders that they've talked to want to keep the company going. And they also say that we really need to do this disposal, even though it smells a bit, well, they don't say that we need it to get the leverage down. And they point out that if they fire the manager now, that would be an event of default in the revolving credit facility, unless they land replacement, which they obviously haven't done yet. So that's not an immediate option. And then there are all these things. I mean, the more we dig into this stuff, all this stuff doesn't really come out until things go wrong. But there's a sort of an extra penalty payment to the manager if they get fired. They've got a chance to buy the portfolio off the company. I mean, to be fair, the way that the rules of those things are set up, really they'd have to pay fair market value for it. But then there's a big question mark over what fair market value is now because of what's going on. The board asked them to waive this. They said no. So that complicates things in terms of another bidder coming along. One of our clients, AVI Global, has taken a 5% stake in it and is pushing now quite hard for shareholders to vote against the disposal and against continuation, which is what I've said too. That's what I'd said in Citywire article. And I have actually voted already. That's sort of lodged already. And they make the point, and this is what I was alluding to in my article, is that even if you lose a continuation vote, you've still got 6 months to decide what to do, and that doesn't necessarily have to mean that you just want to liquidate the company. You can explore all sorts of different ways of sorting this situation out. And they're saying, no, realistically, you've introduced this discount triggered test, but you've got no way of getting the discount down. So why don't you just put off the inevitable? Why don't you sort it out now? And it's also asking for clarification on the terms of the investment management agreement, because there are all sorts of rules around that again. Best go read their letter about it, actually. It makes no sense. So you can just Google AVI Global Hipgnosis, then you can read the letter that they've written. So it's sort of a mess. I'm with AVI Global, vote against continuation, vote against the disposal, and then sort it out afterwards. Syncona, this was doing very, very well, but has had a long period of decline now. See, with the NAV hasn't really gone anywhere, and the share price is coming down, and it's gone to a big discount. Biotech, we know, is very out of favour. And you can see that in the discounts here, where this is probably on one of the widest discounts now. I think it is, yes, it's the widest discount. And you can also see it in the returns, and this is why it's the widest discount, because it's also lost you money over 5 years, which obviously is not great. And the whole sector returns are pretty poor. The only ones that look at all reasonable are the ones that don't invest just in biotech, but invest in wider healthcare sector. So things like the Polycap Fund and so Bellevue and the World Healthcare Funds, they're a bit better. But biotech generally is just being poor. It is worth then reminding ourselves that this has not done a bad job since it was launched. And it has actually created some, because it's funding investment into new therapies, because it came out of the Battle Against Cancer Trust, that's what it was called originally, put in stuff from Wellcome and Pure Cancer Research and stuff. And they've come up with some really good companies that they've sold for quite a lot of money. But against that, they've had some big write-downs. So because the discount had reached such an extraordinary level, they decided in 29th December they were going to launch £40 million buyback. They got plenty of money to do that because all the way through they've had this big pool of uninvested capital, which is actually managed by a whole load of managers, but it's in short-term instruments and that sort of stuff. That didn't used to earn them anything really, but actually, if you think about what interest rates have done, that would actually be now quite a nice little earner for them. But there we go. But they are planning to spend quite a lot of it. So there's another 200 million that they're planning to spend before the end of March 2024. So that 578 number is coming down quite quickly. So in terms of the buyback, they've only really just started this, but it's already narrowed the discount by 10 percentage points. And I think that's very encouraging. It probably just shows you how liquid this thing is, because a lot of people bought it as a long-term investment because they like the idea of what it's doing in terms of creating new cures for incurable diseases, and a lot of those have been cancer. The other thing it announced this week, and this is the reason we're talking about it, is that it's going to buy the shares it doesn't own in Freeline Therapeutics. So it already owns 58% stake, more or less. They're not paying very much for it. They don't own about $9 million. And that is remarkable when you look at these figures down here in terms of what they did. So that they've invested 183 million into this. It IPO'd the equivalent $270 per share against the $5 bid. It raised almost 190 million of external capital. That's been more or less burnt through. So it's only funded now through to the second quarter 2024. So by taking it back in house, they're picking up very cheaply. They're sort of getting the benefit of all that for almost for free. So for that, it's quite clever. But the reason that it's not worth very much is that the two headline things that he was working on, they've been discontinued. So it thought it had a treatment for haemophilia B, and actually it was showing some promise, but there are rival gene therapies that have overtaken it and actually might be a bit more reliable. And then in April this year, it paused its trials for Fabry disease, which is another gene mutation that causes lots of problems. And because it's decided, with the limited resources it did have left, to focus on the Gaucher disease thing here. They've got data from that trial coming out next week, which they presumably think is going to be encouraging. And then behind that, there are other things that they can do. So I think Syncona sees this as an opportunity to pick up this thing dead cheap, fund it through to determining whether that's going to work or not, and then call whether they want to back it all the way through or knock it on the head altogether. So it also looks quite sensible to me. They've got quite a lot going on. The big things, the late stage clinical stuff, but there's quite a lot of companies in the portfolio now. They've been adding new things all the time, and 3 or 4 companies a year is what they're sort of aiming at. And this is one of the reasons they're spending this 150 million quid. So the Autolus thing, they've got a treatment for acute lymphatic leukemia. I think that's right, AL. And which has gone through all its clinical trials and should start being marketed soon. And then another 5 trials that they've got ongoing. So that's quite encouraging, and that could be quite valuable. And then some late stage stuff in a thing they set up relatively recently called Beacon Therapeutics, which is eye problems, again, gene therapy stuff. It's not all rosy because there is an 8p hit that hasn't worked its way through into the NAV yet. That was announced in September, but they haven't announced an NAV since, because one of the big disposals it made was Gyroscope to Novartis, and Novartis has dropped the lead asset program from that. And that removes some milestone payments, which takes about 8p a share off. But yeah, that's what I worked through. So I just think that one's interesting. There we go. I'm going to call time on me now.